Cheide.
In this 3-minute rules, we will be looking at the combat phase, and in particular the rules for combat reform. All of this can be found on page 55 of the large 8th edition rulebook. Combat reform. Assuming that a unit doesn't flee the fight, its leader can attempt to bring more warriors to bear against the foe. This, of course, is far easier for the winning side as they have sufficient momentum, but a disciplined unit can manage this even if on the losing end of a combat. For this example, we will say that the dwarves have won this combat, which makes them victorious, and now they're able to make a reform for free. In this case, they definitely want to reform because they have been attacked on their flank, and they want to turn now and face the enemy. One special restriction to this rule is that it cannot be used to get a model out of base contact with the enemy if that model was in contact before the reform was made. In this case, all of the warriors are all the same and they are put back into combat, but say we had a character in here, we cannot reform to move the character out of combat. Reforming amid defeat. Let's change the situation now and say that the High Elves have been defeated and they are now being attacked in their flank. And for some reason now they want to reform after having lost the battle. To do so, the High Elves will need to pass a leadership test to muster the necessary discipline to alter its formation. Now this leadership test is subject to any modifiers from the fight that had just happened. And if the unit is in fact steadfast, it can roll on its unmodified leadership. In this case, the High Elves are in fact steadfast, so they will use their leadership of 8. Therefore, they need to roll an 8 or less to be able to reform. And there is a 9. They failed their leadership test, which means they have to stay in place. Were the High Elves to roll an 8 or less, they would then be able to reform. And once again, the leadership test will be modified from the combat. So were the High Elves to lose by 2, their leadership would drop from an 8 to a 6. In order to reform, then they would need to roll a 6 or less. And finally, a couple of unusual situations. If both sides wish to make or attempt to make a combat reform, take any leadership test required in order to make the reforms, then roll off to determine which side makes all of his reforms first. The winner of the roll decides. So in this case, with a 5 to a 2, the dwarves will be able to make their reforms first. In addition, if a unit is engaged to more than one facing, in this example the dwarves are engaged both on the flank and the rear, then this unit cannot make combat reforms. And with this we come to the conclusion of our video on combat and combat reforms. Thank you for joining us here today at Grey Army Gaming for the future of fantasy.